So, welcome everyone. My name is Georgi Shuradze. I'm one of the co-founders of CinSOIL. CinSOIL is the company that organized this session, and today's focus is to look into how we can advance Scope 3 removals with carbon farming. Today we'll be discussing regulations regarding this topic that were recently implemented in EU. And before we start that, and then also, of course, answer the questions that you may have regarding this topic. Maybe briefly, we can go through the agenda. First few minutes we'll spend on the introduction, what we'll cover during the day, and also briefly introducing CinSOIL. After that, we will go into specifics of the regulation. That is carbon removal and carbon certification framework by European Union, and that will be we will have like a deep dive in that regulation and what kind of implication it has on carbon farming practices. We'll spend approximately 25 to 30 minutes on that. That part of the session will be led by Tafsir Shah, CEO of CinSOIL. After that, we will have approximately 15 minutes to answer your questions. You can ask questions in the chat during the deep dive part, or you could also during the Q&A session voice them in live. After that, we will have approximately 5 minutes to sum up our activities and what will be the next steps after this session. That part will be done by our colleague Nicola, and then last 5 minutes will be spent on the wrap up, and that will close today's session. But now moving to the next part, which is a brief introduction of CinSOIL and what we do. CinSOIL, the name stands for Carbon in Soil, is developing software, which is basically software for measuring, monitoring, and reporting and verification of soil organic carbon in agricultural land. We're developing this software for agri-food companies to support their initiatives, activities related to the decarbonization of their supply chains. For that, we are using the most advanced science for it. All the co-founders of the company have scientific backgrounds. In total, we have approximately 30 years of experience from complementary fields. And then, of course, this is very much based on the Earth observation technologies and also complex AI models. Yes. Now moving to the sessions that we are going to have, mainly focusing on today. This part of the session will be led by Tafsir Shah. He is the CEO, COO, and the co-founder of CinSOIL. His background is in food systems. He has a PhD in food systems. That's primarily where he spent most of his research and postdoctoral time period, and which he did together with Technical University of Hamburg, or at Technical University of Hamburg. And then after his doctoral and postdoctoral time period, he also worked in policy, more specifically with Berlin-based TMG. And in that role, he advised companies like WWF and FAO, to name only some of them. So now I will hand over to you, Tafsir. So please, stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, for the kind introduction. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And we are really excited to talk over the next 1 hour. I will start with the focus, or what is at the focus of the whole regulation that we are going to talk about, and what is at the center of the sector that we are basically working in, the agri-food sector. So yes, I am basically talking about soil. Soil plays a major role. It is the source of, if not all food, but it's safe to say, to quote the number, 95%, more than 95% of food comes from soil. Soil supports 1/3 of global livelihoods. It's home to 1/4 of global biodiversity. And here we're only talking about the in-soil biodiversity. And if we also then include the above ground biodiversity, which is also heavily dependent on soil, the number could be a bit higher. Soil is also functioning as a water storage and also a water purifier that ensures that um, the groundwater does not get polluted and ensures water mm, plays a major role, significant role in water security. In addition to that, soil is a giant carbon sink, and this is the point which is uh, the major focus of this workshop. And this, of course, is when soils are healthy, they are able to provide these services, they're able to function and provide these ecosystem services to the best possible level. And agriculture and agri-food systems are um, deeply involved in how soils are managed. And hence, agriculture and agri-food systems play a major role in how, to what extent these life-sustaining functions of soil um, are able to basically be delivered. But as things stand, soil health is a major challenge throughout the world. And if we talk about the European level, almost 3/4 of agricultural land is has basically faces challenges of nutrient imbalances, and which has to do with the organic basically losses in soil. And when we talk about soil health, and when we talk about the function of soil as a carbon storage, we have also need to talk about what basically agri-food sector contributes towards greenhouse gas emissions, because agri-food systems, agri-food value chains consist of a lot of actors, a lot of stakeholders, and a lot of activities which lead to greenhouse gas emissions at different stages. It could be on farm, it could be due to the use of different machines, it could be also due to land use change, but also upstream and downstream processing of food and non-food agri products, which basically then translates to this, that almost 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions come from the agri-food sector. And what's specific, or what's special, I would say, for the agri-food sector is that majority of these emissions are scope 3 in nature. So if we translate in global emissions terms, it translates to 20% of the total global greenhouse gas emissions are scope 3 emissions from the agri-food sector. And scope 3 emissions being the most complex to solve as a challenge. In this context, from the perspective of an agri-food company, scope 3 emissions would refer to indirect emissions other than indirect energy emissions from the value chain, which mainly involves on-farm emissions. The scope 3 emissions leads to a challenge with which agri-food companies need to compensate almost 10 billion tons of carbon globally within the value chain. But for the agri-food sector, there's a silver lining, which is soil carbon sequestration, because soil, as we mentioned, is the largest terrestrial carbon sink. It could absorb almost the entirety of scope 3 emissions from the sector, and this this methodology, or this approach of using or optimizing the carbon storage potential of soil, is known as carbon farming, whereby regenerative agricultural practices are implemented. So now the solution seems to be there, but then what recently happened is basically the carbon removal and carbon farming regulation that was agreed upon 3 months ago, and it came into force 2 months ago on the 26th of December 2024. It provides a detailed framework for carbon farming projects, because there are, as we will see later, some I would call them pioneer companies who are doing carbon farming projects at some scale with their farmers, with their food producers. But this regulation, as we will see in the following slides, provides a detailed framework to certify those efforts that these companies, that these farmers are doing to contribute to climate action, to contribute to soil health, and to contribute to other ecosystem services. It came after a long period of negotiations, discussions. Initially, the proposal was proposal was brought forward in 2022, and finally now we are in 2025. The regulation has been enforced for 2 months now, and after 4 years, basically December 2028, there should ideally be a Europe-wide union register in place. This whole aimed at accelerating climate action in agriculture, and also improving ecosystem services from the soil health perspective. When we talk about the CRCF, the Carbon Removals and Carbon Farming Regulation, there are different categories of carbon storage that this regulation is talking about, which includes BECCS, DUCs. But what we are focusing in this workshop is carbon farming, specifically soil-based carbon farming, which includes agricultural practices that lead to an increase in carbon levels in soil. And when we talk about these practices, carbon farming solutions, which relate immediately to increasing the carbon content, soil organic carbon, this could include agricultural practices, intercropping, adding biochar to the soil, crop rotation, or forestry initiatives, or biomass storage in soil, or even peatland management. And here, under in terms of these subcategories, we are focused on the agricultural practices based carbon farming. There need to be a little bit of clarity because the regulation talks about certain things and there are set definitions. For example, carbon farming is defined as any activity, any set of practices that are implemented in on an agricultural farm that will last at least 5 years and lead to a net increase in carbon removals. And then they define the monitoring period as the period during which the soil emission reduction or the storage of carbon is monitored by an operator. An operator means basically the project developer. And then carbon farming sequestration is defined as in terms of metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent that are removed temporarily through the carbon farming activity. And how basically does the certification work? Because as I mentioned, there are already companies, there are already farmers who are doing carbon farming initiatives, but now there's a set approach, there's a set framework that enables them to get properly incentivized for their activities. So the quality criteria of the CRCF forms the basis, basically. If basically you don't fulfill this quality criteria, your carbon farming project cannot be certified. This is the first step, basically. So there's a certification body from the European Commission, and then it contracts a certifier organization to conduct these compliance audits for the different carbon farming projects. And the first thing they see is whether quality criteria are being basically whether there's a compliance with the quality criteria. And then the project developer gets a certificate of compliance. But we'll go into details now, because what is this quality criteria that we are talking about? So it's a kind of a not an abbreviation, but kind of the QU means quantification. So you have to adhere to certain quantification methodologies and give approximate numbers or quantifiable, basically numbers that say how much carbon is expected to be stored as a result of these activities. Then the additionality criteria says that the carbon storage or the carbon removal should exceed the standard baseline, or if there are national requirements for farmers to or agri-food companies to have a certain level of carbon in soil, then this additionality criteria dictates that there should be addition to that. Basically, the project should lead to net increase in carbon removals. Furthermore, then these carbon farming activities should be monitored at least basically for the project duration, which is, as we mentioned earlier, at least 5 years for carbon farming projects. And then eventually, carbon farming should not only lead to net increase in carbon in soil, it should also contribute to other sustainability benefits, like in terms of water, biodiversity, or even pollution control. So this net carbon removal benefit that I mentioned earlier from the additionality perspective is something that's calculated like the carbon removals as a result of this activity minus the greenhouse gas emissions as a result of activity minus the carbon removals that result from the baseline. This is how basically the applicant, when a project developer applies for this compliance certificate, they have to mention all these calculations of expected carbon removals as a result of the activity. Furthermore, if small farmers are involved in this carbon farming activity, which is something that is encouraged in the regulation, then the project developers have to also provide decision support for such small scale farmers. And also important to mention is that the start date and end date of project is to be included in the project application. And finally, the project application also needs to mention what kind of monitoring plan is being basically developed and what monitoring tools are being used. So if we go step by step, what basically the whole process looks like, the project developers, they decide which certification scheme they want to apply for. They send the application with all the details. As we mentioned, there will be a certification audit conducted by the certifier, and then once the project has been, or once the project developer has been certified, the project enters the certification registry, and there is going to be a recertification audit latest every 5 years. For some kind of carbon farming projects, the recertification audit happens every 2 years or every 3 years, but latest it happens every fifth year of the project. And the certifier organization has to submit a report to the European Commission appointed certification body every year about the activities they are conducting under their umbrella. So how does it benefit basically the different stakeholders of the agri-food systems? Food companies could reward their farmers for higher carbon removals, which as mentioned, some farmers, some food companies are already doing, and they can better credibly document their carbon removal efforts. And furthermore, even government agencies could finance carbon farming projects and in the process contribute to soil restoration in their regions, achieve climate action goals in terms of the NDCs, but also encourage other sustainability efforts because the CRCF mandates that carbon farming projects also contribute to other ecosystem services. Furthermore, it's very much possible, and it's even encouraged, that the carbon removal units, carbon removal certificates generated under CRCF be used for getting access to other financing programs of the EU, such as the incentive schemes of the Common Agricultural Policy of or individual policies of the member states. So if there are already, as I mentioned, some of the companies who are already doing insetting and carbon farming projects, what does CRCF now, what changes does it bring? So earlier, companies used to do carbon farming projects, and they used to maybe take soil samples and see how much carbon is there, and maybe based on that provide some incentives to the farmers. But now you have a robust certification framework in place that is basically provided or approved by the European Commission, and there will be traceability and transparency because of the existence of these registers. And as a result of which, companies will find it easier to achieve their scope 3 emissions, because some of these agri-food companies face the problem, as we mentioned, that majority of agri-food emissions are scope 3 in nature, and some of these companies also basically want to leverage carbon farming to reduce those scope 3 emissions. As an example, a couple of examples in this regard, as I mentioned, some companies are already doing it. Baria's regenerative agriculture program, they are partnering with their farmers to adopt different agroecological and regenerative agriculture practices like cover cropping, crop rotation to improve and sequester carbon. And this results in improved soil carbon levels and reduced greenhouse gas emissions. This is exactly what CRCF wants to promote. And it also has shown that it increases the resilience of, for example, the crop production. And it has led to co-benefits like reduced water, basically spills, reduced water runoffs, which means increased water retention in soils and increased biodiversity, and ultimately also strengthening the relationship between the company and the farmers. Another example is Lidl's carbon farming project in Ireland, where they are working with mostly dairy farmers under improved grassland management and also agroforestry to offset their scope 3 emissions. But another example is Arla, who have been doing on-farm assessments to measure carbon footprints and identifying where the farmers could improve carbon sequestration in soil, and which has resulted in reduced emissions, as we can see from the basically reports of Arla. But what the CRCF now, I would say, enables with specific and context-specific criteria is that the CRCF provides a way how other companies can do it, and or how these companies can scale these projects up. And this is another example from General Mills, who are even partnering with certain organizations in terms of decision support and providing dairy cooperatives with the necessary knowledge transfer tools and decision support tools to enhance long-term carbon sequestration. So now there could be basically new projects that are coming up as a result of CRC, but there are also existing projects of these companies, for example. So what challenges does CRCF bring these existing projects? So maybe earlier in these projects, they had a very simple arrangement. They took the samples and they provided incentives for farmers. But now there has to be documentation, there has to be adherence to these standards. And so basically companies need to conduct analyses, what gaps they have that they need to fulfill in order to comply with the quality criteria, and then accordingly allocate resources and also look for monitoring solutions, decision support solutions, or even consultancy services that they need basically to do the necessary changes in their projects, in their carbon farming projects, to adhere to the CRCF standards and to qualify for the different incentives. But it's not only challenges; it also brings opportunities, because there is now enhanced credibility when you do your projects in compliance with the CRCF regulation. You definitely get increased credibility, and the market size increases if you were doing only these activities in a specific country, but now you have a uniform EU-wide interoperable standards in the interoperable registries. It leads to increased credibility, increased transparency, and yeah. Briefly, if taking an example of for example, a cooperative that's in France, it's running a carbon farming project that is basically asking the farmers to implement certain regenerative agriculture practices to increase the carbon sequestration. What would basically their steps, what steps would they need to take in order to align with CRCF? So they have to first quantify the benefits. What's the baseline that they are talking about? What's the regional baseline, if there is one? And what kind of practices can they implement to increase the soil carbon sequestration? And if the basically when the practices are implemented, does it lead to some increased greenhouse gas emissions? And then they have to do this net benefit analysis, net carbon removal analysis, and prepare such as different scenarios which could lead to a net positive, basically, carbon removals. And that would also contribute to the second step, which is to demonstrate additionality. If there are local regulations that stipulate that farmers or food producers need to demonstrate a certain threshold of additionality of carbon levels, of water pollution avoidance, or biodiversity protection measures, you have to demonstrate, or this project will have to demonstrate, that they are going beyond that, and that will be adhering to the additionality standard. And that would lead to implementing or designing or planning such measures that increase these co-benefits, that increase these additional ecosystem services. And then the last steps would include engaging with the certification bodies, the certification organizations, and applying for a compliance certificate, and getting in touch with the certifying with the register, and basically then registering the credits, which will finally be transferred into the union registry, which comes after 4 years. Till that, basically the credits or the carbon units will be registered in an interim registry for transparency and traceability. I think I am done, and thank you, Georgi, for this surprise. And I think we are open to questions and ready with answers, I think.
We had a question in the chat from Georgia about would the monitoring step with the project developer be subsidized by the EU as an incentive for farmers to adhere to the voluntary carbon capturing certification?
What did you say about monitoring? And
well, the question is, would the monitoring step with the project developer be subsidized by the EU? Because Georgia is asking about an incentive for farmers to adhere to the voluntary carbon capturing certification. Are there any any incentives or any subsidies for the implementation of the CRCF?
Subsidies from CRCF per se do not exist, but as I mentioned in the presentation, that it has been designed in a way that's these ecosystem benefits or the increased carbon levels in soil, the credits generated can be used to get incentives from other European Commission agriculture-related laws. For example, the Common Agricultural Policy has different instruments by which farmers are incentivized. Farmers are provided incentives for different different practices. For example, in certain regions, they want farmers to always have their soil covered. So there are monitoring services that monitor exactly that, how long the farmers are keeping the soil covered with a cover crop or something, and then they get incentivized for that. And the CRCF is basically a framework to certify carbon units generated from soil carbon sequestration, but an independent incentive scheme is something that's not yet part of it. It's basically, it helps you certify your efforts, and then you take those numbers, you take those certificates to the local CAP implementation authority and get incentivized for the ecosystem services.
Liv, you raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think there's also a question in the chat, just in the Q&A part of the chat, but I will jump in. My question was just on the 5-year kind of timeline. If you could go a little bit more in depth on that in regards to also selling these credits, if you decided to sell them as a farmer instead of using them for your own scope, since there's not an incentivizing frame yet for CO2 emissions for agriculture. I mean, in Denmark, there is now getting introduced, but this is the first country. So just a bit more on this. How is that 5 years really calculated, and is that significant or enough in your point of view? So, thank you.
Yeah, I think the interesting part is point of view, because when we say 5 years, and also for certain, so we're talking about carbon farming projects, only projects that we are doing in the farm with different agricultural practices, maybe biochar addition, maybe intercropping, maybe using certain crops that lead to increased carbon sequestration, maybe agroforestry. So depending on the practice, depending on the project you are proposing, they will stipulate whether you will have a 5-year runway or whether you will have a 3-year runway, meaning that if it's a 5-year runway, you are set for 5 years. Basically, your practice is certified for 5 years. Your project is certified for 5 years, and then after 5 years, you have to do the recertification. But if it's such a practice that they are not sure about, then they might say, you have 2 years, you have 3 years, and after 3 years, you need to recertify. So that being said, the carbon farming carbon removals are classified as temporary carbon removals. And that is why, from my point of view, this 5-year limit is there, that maximum 5 years for practices that are highly likely to sustain the carbon levels for 5 years. For them, after 5 years, there will be a review. If it was, on the contrary, if it was one of the permanent carbon removals that also is part of the CRCF, then they are talking about 35 years or even centuries in some cases. But since we're talking about agriculture, like farming activities, which are, I would say, which basically leads to soil carbon stocks being volatile, then I think this very short return times are justified in order to ensure that these carbon removals, even if they're called temporary, then basically if there's a company, an agri-food company who is doing a carbon farming project with a certain farming cooperative, since the removals are classified as temporary, they have to, after 5 years, again see whether their project is still storing carbon. So I think from that perspective, it makes sense that there are quicker recertification times. Yeah, I think that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
It links obviously with a question. Fleur, we got your question. We will answer it in a while, but we have a question that might link to this particular recertification in the Q&A about that there are some researchers and past experience that suggest that the topsoil is not able to store carbon as much as the deep soil. And so this could be something that would maybe affect the process or the implementation moving forward. And the question is, what can you tell us about that? And do you think we should focus on the deep soil moving forward, or it's way too complicated in terms of technicalities?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very basically important question, and this is what we at CinSOIL are also dealing with, because soil stores carbon, as it's also mentioned in the question, not just in the top soil. So we need to. I know we say that we are basically using Earth observation and AI models to monitor soil carbon stocks, but when we talk about Earth observation, it's only looking at the topsoil. So what we also integrate is models, process-based model that take into account what is happening under the soil, in terms of, not going into too much detail, in terms of how the vegetation looks like. Because if the deep soil is rich of carbon, it will show somehow in the above ground vegetation. And that's what we also want to take into consideration when monitoring soil carbon stocks. And absolutely, we need to take deep soil into consideration.
That's that. And we have a question in the chat from Fleur. How can we use CinSOIL's AI and Earth observation tools to better measure and monitor soil carbon? Which I think you partially answered.
Yeah. I think I just mentioned it in the answer to the previous question. So, but maybe from a macro perspective, as I mentioned in the presentation, that the regulation specifically asks that there needs to be a monitoring system in place that is scalable. It specifically mentions models, and that's also what I just mentioned, that with a monitoring system that is long term, that's scalable, and with the recertification requirements every few years, latest every 5 years, I think it's essential to have a monitoring system that can provide you also a time series analysis, and that's what we want to we as CinSOIL want to enable.
Very well. Any other questions at this stage? Colin, go for Colin.
Could you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Thanks. First of all, thanks for the invite. Thanks for the presentation and stuff like that. I think we were on the verge of meeting in Valencia at the carbon farming, but we didn't quite get there. Your colleague tried to set us up. There was so much going on at the time and stuff like that. Yeah, so it's thanks for the presentation and that. It's really great to see how things are evolving with the European carbon farming, how it's developing, and it's just kind of started just now. Like you say, it was presented in December. It's only been a couple of months old, basically, and it's still got a lot of work to be done on it. I mean, to get it refined, you know, the implementation and stuff like that, I suppose. Yeah, it's interesting to see what you were saying about the provisional temporary credits that will be the sort of maybe 2 to 5 years, stuff like that. That was one of the things that came up in Valencia last year, was to incentivize the farmers to do this. How could we persuade them to do it? You know, the financial sort of benefits and stuff like that to compensate for all the work that they've got to do, like you just explained there, all the steps they've got to take before they could actually generate the credits. You know, and so So basically, what the way it is at the moment, I understand, if it's a 5 years, I've got a temporary life of 5 years. If I was looking to buy a credit on the market to compensate my scope 1, 2, or 3 emissions, I would just be buying like a temporary. It would only last for 5 years, and then I'd have to go and look for another one. This may reduce the value of the credit. You know what I mean? Compared with another, I mean, biochar credits they're speaking about that's got a permanence of, they started saying 100 years. Now they're saying there's biochar credits that could be for 4, 5, 6, 7, 800 years of permanence, which raises the quality, so they say, and then raises the price of the credit. You know what I mean? So, but anyway, we've got to start somewhere, obviously. So if we've got a credit that's got 5 years guarantee for the person that buys it, you know, I think it's a good start. Also, I wanted to ask you, of the certification bodies, has the European Commission or anybody over in Brussels started designating certification bodies, companies that, or have they got a legal system, a framework that companies can apply to be certification bodies, the criteria?
Yeah. Thank you, Colin. Yeah, it's a pity that we didn't get to meet in Valencia, but I think if you are in Dublin next week, our co-founder. Sorry?
I can't go. Are you guys going?
Antonella is going, our CTO. She has a session there. I think that will come up a bit later in the slides. But answering your question, I mean, of course, I mean, you said it, what needs to be said, like there needs to be a start somewhere. And I think it's a good start that there's a framework in place that aims to reward activities by farmers in terms of ecosystem service and soil carbon sequestration. But yes, this temporary nature is something that's also puts it on a very shaky ground. I think that's something that will need to be, that will come up in the consultations that are planned for in the next few months. I think there are some like multi-stakeholder consultations planned in, I think, May, June this year. So there needs to be some refinement, and there, with regards to the certification bodies and certification schemes, and they're also, I think, different certifiers, different certifying organizations that are working in the field of carbon credits and offsetting so far. They are developing certification schemes when it comes to carbon farming, and I think it's a matter of time. Like I mentioned, there's going to be consultations in the next few months. Then it will be more clear. But as of now, there are no designated certification bodies to my knowledge. But yeah, there is a, if we go basically, there's a timeline of activities that they have published, and it also includes these consultations in the next months. I think in the next months we'll have something also ready. It also links again with the with what our co-founder Antonella is doing. She's chairing a focus group on basically leveraging Earth observation for carbon farming to support carbon farming activities. I think there are still some moving parts, but it's a good start. We have a framework in place, but work still needs to be done.
Yeah. Good. Thanks.
As you said, of works need to be done, especially on this very new, variable, and somehow ambiguous topic and its integration into the sector in Europe recently, and with everything that is also being changed or potentially changing with the new omnibus suggestions of policies and simplifying things and so on and so forth, which leads us to basically delving deeper into the topic. And for that matter, I would like to suggest to you before we log off, we would like to know which subtopic or topic would be interested in discussing in a follow-up call with you. For that matter, I'm launching a small poll right now. You should have it popping up on your screens. If not, you can go to your right hand side on the activities and press poll. And if you can please just let us know from the deep dive of the CRCF presented by Dr. Tafsir, which subtopic are you interested in discussing in more depth? Is it the in-setting strategy? Is it the CRCF compliance? Is it the project scoping? Is it anything other than those three? Or is it several subtopics from those above? And we will be reaching out to you after this workshop in order to discuss this in more depth and organize it in a seamless way. Let's give it a minute. Take your time, and then we're gonna go over to Gio to wrap it up.
Actually, can you hear me, Tal?
Yes, yes.
I just had one last question. I was wondering whether with the CRSC there would be different standards for example, large conventional farms to reach these certifications versus smaller scale unconventional farms in terms of ability to access certifications, or even compliance over, for example, the farm starting up versus a farm that's been running for like 20 years.
Yes, if I understood the question correctly, yes, there's a difference basically in how small farmers and big established farms will basically approach the CRCF. The compliance requirements will be much, I would say, simpler, and these application process will also be much simpler. At least that's what the CRCF mentions, that there will be an easier pathway for smaller farmers compared to the bigger farmers. So I think that is also aimed at incentivizing smaller farmers to participate in carbon farming activities comparatively to bigger farmers. Is that what you asked, Georgia?
Yeah, that sounds really great. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Amazing. Over to you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tafsir. Thank you, Nicola, every participant, and also those who were active with questions. To sum it up and before closing, I want to just mention and share some of the details about the sessions that was briefly mentioned by Tafsir. Some of you might be actually joining the European Carbon Farming Summit in Ireland, the second one now taking place in March, the last one which will take place in Dublin this year. Last year it was in Valencia. And during that summit, CinSOIL is organizing one session which is specifically addressing the uncertainties and model benchmarking topics related to carbon farming. So our CTO, Antonella Sucuro, is the chair of that session. So if you're interested in topic, I would encourage you to join this session, because the session brings together very interesting and relevant stakeholders together, and there will be very interesting discussion about this important topic. Yes, like Nicola mentioned, there will be communication from our side regarding follow-up meetings with every participant of the meeting, everyone who registered for it. If you are, however, a bit impatient with that, you can also reach out to us on the provided contact information that you can now see on the screen, and also the recording of the session will be provided. And with that, I will be closing now or stopping the recording of the session. And yeah, like we usually say, let's bring more carbon where it belongs. And for us at CinSOIL, it is in soil. So thank you very much once again for the participation, and we keep in touch. Have a good day. Bye-bye.